brands are not just selling products, they're selling an experience. And there's a loyalty component there. There's a look and feel. There's a get behind the scenes and meet the designer. On checkout, there are a lot of customization options usually. So I think we'll certainly see some. If it's a very simple transactional purchase, I could see a buy button hooked up to a wallet, and that's fine. Still need a commerce platform, by the way, for that. But I think most purchases will still be on-site because those brands want to form those emotional long-term engagements with their shoppers.
Welcome to the Ecommerce Toolbox Expert Perspectives, a podcast by Noibu, where we explore the elite strategies and cutting-edge insights with our expert guests. Get ready to propel your e-commerce business to the next level.
Welcome to another episode of the Ecommerce Toolbox Experts Perspective. Joining us today, we have Kelly Goetsch, who's the Chief Strategy Officer at Commercetools. So very excited for this guest. Welcome, Kelly.
Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
In preparation for this episode, I did kind of a deep dive on your LinkedIn to learn a bit more about your history. There's a lot that we'll unpack today. Very impressive in digital commerce, but maybe why don't you give us it in your own words? How did you get to your kind of current role today? Leading, I know you're at ATG, did some stuff for Walmart. Maybe talk to us a bit about your career journey and how you're now the Chief Strategy Officer at Commercetools.
Sure. Going all the way back to high school, the early 2000s, I built a lot of local websites for businesses. And that was a great little side gig. And when I was in university, my freshman year, I was looking for a summer job. And I found a temp job, and that was at Foot Locker. And Foot Locker was in the midst at the time, and I didn't know this, but they were in the midst of the biggest ATG rollout in the world. And ATG was the leading commerce platform back in the 90s and 2000s. Really big deal back then. So I started out by building HTML wireframes out of Photoshop. Very antiquated now, I know, but that's how we did it back then. And then started writing JSPs. And by the time I left a year later, I was doing DBA work. Architecture work. ATG then recruited me, moved to Chicago, and worked and studied full time. I did ATG deployments around the world, a lot of architecture work, really learned the fundamentals, the nuts and bolts of deploying large scale e-commerce. And a lot of these brands were just getting online for the first time. This was pretty early days in 2005, 2006. We still didn't really have mobile phones to speak of that were capable of shopping. So it was a great formative experience. And then Walmart poached me. Walmart was ATG's biggest customer. And I still work for ATG, but they kind of had me as their in-house ATG architect. So we did 10 of those deployments around the world. And that was a good way to learn about enterprise, scale, global deployments. Great experience again. And then my wife and I had our first child. And she said, "You can't go to South Africa on 24 hours notice anymore." You need a real job? I said, yeah, I agree. So I ended up going to Oracle in their early cloud product management group. And that was a great experience as well. I had a great mentor there, Mo Afshar. And for 5 years, did a lot of product management, brought some new products to market. And I wrote e-commerce in the cloud for O'Reilly while I was there, marrying commerce and cloud. And then my last year at Oracle, I was responsible for microservices. And that was a really great intellectual experience for me, just learning about that concept, because before that, I'd worked in these big siloed IT orgs where you have a big infrastructure team and a big DBA team. And the way you get anybody to do anything in any one of these teams is to raise a ticket, which is just ridiculous. So even simple changes, things that would have taken me 3 minutes to do myself, turn into months-long projects because of all the ticketing and the back and forth and the CYA that you see within big organizations. And microservices just blew all that up, which was great. And after 5 years, Mo left and I was looking for something else. And I found Commercetools, which was a perfect combination of commerce, cloud, and microservices. Really, really good experience for me. So thoroughly enjoyed that, built the product management organization, co-founded and ran the MACH Alliance for many years, wrote 3 more O'Reilly books, APIs for Modern Commerce, Microservices, and GraphQL, all the same title. So I did that for 6 years. And then my last 2 years, I've been leading strategy for Commercetools. And here I am.
Amazing. I mean, super decorated history. Definitely can relate with the 24-hour notice to having to take a flight, you only have so many of those cards. So it's funny to hear you say that. Maybe talk to us a bit about your transition from chief product officer to chief strategy officer, what that actually looks like, and now what you're kind of more so focused on day to day.
When I joined Commercetools in 2016, we were only 2 million in annual revenue. And by 2022, roughly, we're 100 plus million at that point, big scale. And I'd been doing a lot of different things as CPO, and I'd spent half of my time outside the company and half my time inside the company. And on the outside, it's things like MACH Alliance, a lot of public writing, speaking, working with some of our very, very large customers and giving them some sponsorship and comfort to move forward with this journey. And then there's a lot of corporate development there as well. So a lot of different things. And then on the inside as well, that was a sizable team and it couldn't do both. At some point, you can't do both. So we brought in a CPO to do more the nuts and bolts of product management at scale, manage the team, and then I get to focus more on the outside of the company. So it's been a good journey.
That's awesome. You mentioned MACH Alliance a couple of times. You're obviously famously one of the founders of MACH Alliance. What is MACH Alliance for those that may not know? I'm assuming they do, but just to kind of reiterate, what is MACH Alliance? What are some of the objectives and what did you seek to actually accomplish when you guys started the organization?
So in 2019, we at Commercetools came up with the term MACH. Well, even before that, in 2013, we invented headless commerce. But MACH in 2019 stands for microservices, APIs, cloud, and headless. And the advantage of that architecture is a lot of freedom, flexibility, build and buy. It's exactly what we do. And the marketing campaign really took off to the point where I had a developer apply to join my team who claimed that he was a MACH certified developer. And I thought, okay, we're onto something here. This is good. This is very good. The problem with any cool new term, and I hope I don't offend any marketers out there, but they latch onto a term like MACH and they ruin it very, very, very quickly. And I saw the same thing happen with cloud. When cloud became a thing in 2008, 2009, every legacy vendor slapped the term cloud over whatever garbage old product they had, and this term stopped meaning anything. We saw the same thing with big data, which was just redefined as anything in a database. AI, we see the same thing now with composable. I was talking to an analyst and he's running an eval right now. He quizzed me. He said, of the 18 commerce platforms we have participating, guess how many claim to be composable on their first slide? Every one of them. And when you have everyone, even platforms going back to 1994 pretending to be composable, you end up in a situation of, as a buyer, how do you know? You have no idea. And I always like to put myself in the buyer's shoes. So we on the vendor side, we know this is really easy for us. We can call BS on this. But if I were to tell you, I want you to establish a veterinary practice and pick the best software to run a veterinary practice, you're not going to have any idea. And I'm sure that world has all sorts of language and standards and innovation that a layperson would have no idea. And that's what our buyers are. They're selling luxury handbags. They're selling furniture. They're selling digital goods. That's their business. Their business is not determining who is actually MACH and who is not. So I got together with some co-founders. We got some seed money from a handful of ISVs and SIs, and I co-founded the Alliance. And what the Alliance seeks to do is protect the usage of the term MACH, give buyers a certification, a threshold for who is actually MACH and who is not actually MACH. It's a lot of community building. So we bring together folks from across the industry on the brand side, as well as the vendor side. And we have different working groups to advance the MACH cause, a lot of social events as well. We do a lot of community outreach. I think we as an industry are better if we come together and we pool our resources versus each one of us as separate, relatively small vendors trying to go up against the mega vendors out there with $100 billion market caps. And I think we've done that. We're now 112 members. We've got a very steady application pipeline, some really big names coming in, and we could pretty easily be at 200 by next year, just based on growth trends and everything else. So it's really self-sustaining now. It's 12 full-time staff, professionally managed. We've got a great board. It's off on its own. It's good to see. It's taking flight.
That's really cool. I mean, congrats. Like starting anything is hard and making it breathe and live is in many ways like a child. So how has been writing all these different books. You've written over 4 books. You're obviously a very talented speaker. You have your own podcast. Like, how has all that learning and mastery shaped your perspective on commerce?
So at Commercetools specifically, when I joined, nobody was talking about microservices. MACH didn't exist. Headless didn't really exist. SaaS-based commerce didn't really exist. It just wasn't a thing. So our success as a company relied on us as a company building out a category. And I'm a really big fan of the book Play Bigger. And it's all about category creation. You define the category, and then you happen to be a top vendor in that category, as opposed to here's a commerce platform. It's really nice. You should buy it. It's not enough to have a better mousetrap, is what I learned. You have to define that category first. And the MACH Alliance was a big part of how we did that as a company, was pooling our resources with others to define the category together as a group, as a friendly group. So I think writing has been very helpful in that regard. It also credentializes us as a company. When you show up to a final meeting and you can hand out some books to a CIO or CMO and say, okay, I realize you're not going to read the entire thing, but read the first chapter of the book on microservices, right? It's 30 pages. I think you get a really good fundamental understanding. And people like that versus just showing up with some pretty slides. Let's have a real substantive discussion about APIs. And people like authenticity. That's what they like, not just broad, vague stories that have little basis in reality. So writing has been helpful there. It's also been helpful for me just personally because it forces you to crystallize your thoughts and do research, and you get to talk to people and interview them and quote them. I talked to Jeff Dean from Google, famous guy, and he was kind enough to give me a quote for my first book. And I would never in a million years have been able to speak to Jeff Dean otherwise. I was 29 when I wrote that book, and he's a legend. And I had all sorts of people like that who, you're writing a book? Sure, I'll give you a quote. That's great. So it was helpful in that regard as well from a networking standpoint.
It's good. And just shifting to Commercetools specifically, I'm very curious, how is Commercetools looking at composable? And to your point, a lot of these terms didn't exist prior to kind of the MACH Alliance and really mainstreaming them. But maybe talk to us a bit about how Commercetool is approaching composable commerce, how that might be different from some other platforms that, like you'd mentioned, everyone claims that they do it now. Maybe talk to us a bit about specifically what it means and how Commercetool is approaching it.
Composable is the broad category. It's the business level term for picking and choosing different pieces. It doesn't have a very strict definition, which I think is a problem, but it is a good high level business term, and it helps the less technical out there understand. I like to say that we are composable as evidenced by our MACH certification, which is a really hard certification to get. So MACH is the technical how, composable is the more business level what. And we at Commercetools started selling, I don't know if you're familiar with the tech adoption bell curve, but you basically start with the early adopters, those who buy tech just because it's cool and new. And then you get to the top of the mass market, and then you get to the laggards. And when we just started out selling, we were out there selling to those who really knew what APIs were, how they worked. They knew about us. We're very technical. They were buying us for technology reasons. And that's a great reason to buy, obviously. But at the same time, it's also a very limited section of the market where you get to build a big company. And what we've done is we've cracked the top of that bell curve. And those buyers, they don't know what a microservice is. They don't care. They just want it in a box ready to go, something that's simple, easy. So what we've done is we've built an offering out called Foundry, and that's a much more pre-packaged, opinionated, it's everything you know and love about Commercetools, but it's in a box and it says with instructions how to assemble the pieces. It's a more complete solution. So we have some of those customers, and that's great. We also have some more legacy customers who say, you know what, we love your shopping cart. We love your promotions, whatever it happens to be. We're going to buy these pieces and put them all together, and we're going to build and buy. And that's fine too. So we can serve both sides of that. And then I'm sure a few years we'll get the laggards to come over as well. And they'll buy the more pre-composed solution.
Yeah. And I won't name anyone, but I've been on a few calls over the last couple of months where I'm surprised. There's not that many, but there's still some folks running on ATG. And what we're seeing are like SAP, and we're seeing that they're migrating different parts of their website at different times to Commercetools. Like they're starting with the cart page, and then they're doing the PDP or whatever it is. But no, it's interesting to hear you say that. It kind of comes full circle. To your point, it's hard to unwind some of these legacy entrenched systems that are kind of like glued together. They're almost like welded together as one long pipe. And it makes sense for then as they start to actually piece it apart and bring in a composable strategy, it'll make it easier for them to upgrade if they want to redo their front end or whatever in the future. So no, it's cool to hear that. We talked a bit about APIs. Talk to us a bit about GraphQL, REST, what some of the differences are, and why it's important for folks to know what that is and the implications of using either GraphQL versus REST or vice versa.
So we at Commercetools were the first commerce platform to support GraphQL. We very quickly got to 100% coverage. And what GraphQL does is on the server side, you call GraphQL and you very clearly describe what data you want. So let's say you're building a product detail page. You say, okay, I want the product information. I want the image assets. I want the price. I want the description. I want applicable promotions. I want reviews. As a front-end developer, you very declaratively state what it is that you want. And what GraphQL then does on the server side is it calls out to all of the appropriate APIs in the backend. And some of those APIs are going to be in-house APIs. Some of those are going to be from us. Some of them are going to be from third parties. They're going to be mix and match, right? And every API has different formats. Some cases they do different authentication, authorization, and front-end developers don't want to have to deal with all of that stuff. So it's a lot easier from the server side to have your GraphQL server go out and make those API calls on your behalf. And then it will then respond to the client with exactly a JSON blob of exactly what it is that they requested. So you make the request as a front-end dev, and then in the back end, doing all the calls, it's dealing with overfetching, underfetching, performance, and you get one response back from the GraphQL server with a payload of what it is that you want. So it's a nice, clean way. And what you're optimizing there is back end. There's a little bit more work on the back end, but your front end experiences can be built a lot easier. So you can build clients in days at this point because all that data is beautifully, cleanly exposed, nice, simple layer. And again, you're not dealing with any performance issues. You just make one call, and then in parallel, it's all from the server side, making all the other appropriate calls.
One of the first books that I read when we started Noibu and coming into retail was The Power of Habit. And it talked a lot about website speed and the impact of website speed to performance. And I think they talk about either Walmart or Target. So building on that, I'm curious, what is the main reason for GraphQL? Is it really just performance, speed to market, or is it just straight up website speed, durability, and flexibility on the front end?
I think it's all those things. I would lean more towards it being faster for front-end development, and you can iterate on those features a lot more quickly. It's a nice abstraction layer. So if you want to swap out providers in the back end, you can very easily without then touching your front end. So that helps out quite a bit. It is a performance thing for sure as well, although I would argue that GraphQL plus Jamstack is probably better. And you can pre-render most of your pages, and that gets you even faster. So it's a solid combination of those things. And most of our customers, I'd say the majority at this point, are using GraphQL in some way. And fun fact, our Scala implementation of GraphQL is used by New York Times. It's used by Twitter. It's a very popular open source library. And we at Commercetools co-hosted and IMC'd GraphQL Conf. It's been a great way for us to reach developers, and a lot of folks out there just have a GraphQL by default policy at this point. So we're all in, and it's an option. A lot of people call our standard APIs too, and that's fine, but I think it's a nice, clean way of doing things.
Pivoting a little bit here, how do you think the MACH architecture actually supports modern commerce, and which ICP is it kind of most beneficial for?
So I would say MACH is modern. So microservices allow for individual small teams to rapidly innovate on their features. And each team can release to production whenever it wants without breaking the API contract. So that gets you to iterate quickly. I'm a big believer that innovation requires iteration. And then being API first allows you to change the backend implementation without breaking your APIs. So we're well north of 10,000 API calls or updates behind our APIs at Commercetools. Feature releases were in the hundreds. So just goes to show like we're making constant changes positively. And as long as we're not breaking the API contract, everybody gets those immediately. And that's something very important to us, is that we not break that contract. That's a very sacred thing for us. Cloud native multi-tenant SaaS means you scale up and scale down as appropriate. So if you get somebody on Instagram or TikTok that says, hey, check out this product, it's pretty cool, you're going to get a huge spike in traffic very quickly. And modern cloud native multi-tenant SaaS allows you to deal with those spikes in traffic very quickly. And then headless is also just default these days. I know it's funny to think about, but it wasn't that long ago that we didn't have iPhones until 2007. They're a relatively modern invention if you go back in time. And as a result, you need multiple heads. Before that, you only needed one head. It's just the website. Everything came packaged in a box. The web was part of your back end. And people shopped on browsers. But now a head can be anything. It could be a button, it could be a kiosk, it could be a mobile app, it could be a pop-up store. So headless is just default these days. So I think that's how MACH goes back to support modern commerce these days.
Obviously, in your role heading up strategy, AI has been something that has been obviously a buzzword for probably about 2 years now, but actually very strategic for some businesses. So question for you is, do you think AI will be strategic for Commercetools and more commerce in general? And if so, what are some of the best use cases that you've actually seen specifically applied?
AI is complicated, very complicated. So I would say AI is improving consumers' lives. I use ChatGPT constantly and Gemini and others. And I think we're going to see more product discovery shifting to AI. So imagine a future assistant that's hooked up to your calendar that knows that you're going on a cruise, for example, and also knows your purchase history and knows that you don't have an appropriate shirt for a formal night. I would expect the AI to say, hey, you're missing a formal shirt for your Tuesday night dinner. You should probably get one. And then here's a list of recommendations along with links to go buy them. You could also imagine a scenario, you can do this today through Bing Shopping Copilot, where you could say, hey, where can I buy a Lululemon running shorts, size medium near me? And it will give you reasonably accurate information on that. So I think it's going to take over the head quite a bit. So that's one. I also see AI from an internal standpoint, improving our own productivity. So we're using it for meeting notes, for building PowerPoint presentations, writing copy. I don't use it personally for that. It doesn't really get my voice very well, but for a lot of writing, you don't have to necessarily. It's a summation of a meeting that goes out to C-level at Commercetools. That's a perfect example of where AI is a good solution there. So that's another use. There are some features that are incrementally beneficial for AI. So think of search being a little bit improved, some co-pilots if you're writing content or categorizing products and things. And we're doing some things in that area as well, but pretty straightforward, nothing crazy there. And then I think the real benefit is improving time to market. So with AI, you can now very easily build out experiences, build out integrations, build out custom microservices, use co-pilots to augment your development efforts. That's where you really start to see some value, some tangible value. It's building those experiences faster. And historically, at least, anytime it's been easier to a resource that has been expensive, in this case, development resources, anytime that resource becomes less expensive, you have demand for that thing skyrocket. And I'll give you a good example. When electricity first hit the market 150 years ago, very expensive, not many people used it. Over time, it became a lot cheaper and everybody used it. You can say the same thing about gasoline. You could say the same thing about internet infrastructure and bandwidth. Anytime there's something that becomes cheaper and more widely available, demand skyrockets for that thing. And I can see the same thing for e-commerce experiences as well. I think a lot of folks are rightly fixated on their flagship.com brand or their app, and that's fine. And they should be. But at the same time, there are a lot of experiences that could be custom built. Imagine concerts where you've got a pop-up store for a specific concert, or different events. You could imagine in-context experiences at a kiosk, for example, based on the shirt that you're wearing. It might offer recommendations for shoes. So there are a lot of experiences that could be built. You could build entire microsites around a specific product. That could be a real possibility. So I expect to see this be a real boom for our industry and that we're able to build out more and more of these experiences.
It's interesting. Something that you said stuck out to me. Do you think less and less over time of the transactions will happen directly on the .com and they'll spread out to either in-app purchases through like an Instagram or through an LLM, like you mentioned? If let's say you have an assistant or you're just kind of shopping through almost ChatGPT and then it's bringing in the link. Is that kind of where you're heading with that?
I think the discovery will happen off site, but I think most of the purchases will still be on. And the reason is brands are not just selling products, they're selling an experience. And there's a loyalty component there. There's a look and feel. There's a get behind the scenes and meet the designer. On checkout, there are a lot of customization options usually. So I think we'll certainly see some. If it's a very simple transactional purchase, I could see a buy button hooked up to a wallet, and that's fine. Still need a commerce platform, by the way, for that. But I think most purchases will still be on-site because those brands want to form those emotional long-term engagements with their shoppers.
Makes sense. And yeah, as we look to wrap up, wanted to thank you, Kelly. Super, super insightful. Love following you on LinkedIn. You have some great posts. So yeah, appreciated your time. Thank you so much again.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And I appreciate you following.
The e-commerce toolbox Expert Perspectives is brought to you by Noibu. To find out more about Noibu and how we can help you debug your e-commerce site and rocket your revenue, visit www.noibu.com. That's Noibu.com. And then make sure to search for the e-commerce toolbox Expert Perspectives on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or anywhere else podcasts are found, and click subscribe so you don't miss out on any future episodes. On behalf of the team here at Noibu, thanks for listening.